Hi, everyone. We'll get started in just a moment. As you enter the webinar, it would be great if you could add in the chat where you're calling in from, which university or institution you're with or organization, and also just so the speakers have some insights to your experience in your field work. If you could share the name of any field sites that are challenging to get to, or various road condition, have road conditions that you worry about, that would be great to share in the chat, and we'll get that kind of log of our participants started. Thank you. All right, great. Some familiar faces joining. We'll give people a few minutes to join before we get started. Sand, mud, and kelp. I do not believe we have any kelp in our slides. That's an interesting one. Mud and down trees. Yeah, definitely relevant. All right, well, welcome everyone. My name is Sarah Souza and I work out of UC Berkeley, Environment, Health, and Safety. Thanks for joining this webinar today. It's part of our training series. This is the third webinar we've had this month, and the focus today is off-road driving. We'll have 90 minutes and we'll save time for a question and answer period at the end. Please keep your volume muted until that time period, but you're welcome to ask questions and share comments in the chat throughout the webinar today. I'd like to just acknowledge that one of my favorite parts of my job is bringing together people with a whole wide range of experience, valuable skills together to talk about challenging issues like this. So today we have a panel, and I'll just do some brief introductions and then let them share more about their background and where they work. Today we have a unique panel that came together from across the state to prepare information and share insights on getting to field sites and being prepared, the practices that they have to maintain their vehicles and be prepared. And then also importantly, they will be sharing insights on decision-making in the field. So to get started, I'll just provide brief introductions here. Breezy Jackson, Sequoia Field Stations. Stephen Devanzo is the operations manager for UCLA's White Mountain Research Center. Brett Pickering is the boating safety officer at UC San Diego Scripps Institute of Oceanography, and Geoff Davis is a network and systems engineer with geophysics and planetary physics at UC San Diego. The slides are already posted on our event website, and we'll be sharing the recording as well for your reference. Again, please put questions or comments. I know that there's a lot of expertise from our participants as well. So as they share information, if it triggers various trainings or orientations or things that you've learned from your own experience, please share those in the chat as well. And I think that'll help benefit everyone. Really, our goal with these type of trainings is just to promote safe and successful field research, share insights for the benefit of the broader community, and really just try to avoid us all making the same mistakes. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Breezy to get started.
Yeah, hi everybody. Thanks for joining us. So I'm Breezy Jackson, and I run Yosemite and Sequoia field stations now. I have a lot of different types of experience with off-road access. I worked as a vehicle operator for the U.S. Antarctic program, and that's the photo that you see there. My standard whip was Ivan the Terra bus, which is a 20-ton glacier bus. But I drove a lot of other kinds of vehicles as well. I worked for the Joint Antarctic Search and Rescue Team. So we drove lots of different types of vehicles, like things like Haglunds, which are amphibious and can drive in and out of like water bodies, and learn to drive them in like full whiteout, following radar, things like that. I also worked for the Forest Service, the Park Service, and Fish and Wildlife Service, all driving ATVs and trucks and various equipment on dirt roads in various conditions throughout the Sierra and the Cascades and Idaho. So that's my background. Take it away, Brett.
Hello, my name is Brett Pickering, and I'm boating safety officer at Scripps, and which doesn't keep me working on the roads very much, but I still am quite active with my own expeditions and off-roading. This is a picture of off-roading in Colorado with my vehicle. I spent many field seasons working with rodents in the deserts of New Mexico, high altitude lakes, doing plankton surveys in Colorado when I was an undergrad, part of a project in Africa for a few months. So have been vehicle dependent for research in a wide variety of different locations. Go ahead.
Oh, great. Thanks, Brett. My name is Stephen Devanzo. I'm the operations manager for UCLA's White Mountain Research Center. And most of the driving that we do is up in elevation. It's up on very rocky dirt roads. We do get a lot of snow. We get a lot of rain. We get a lot of mud. And I've been doing this for about 10 years now. And I've been through many, many situations, helped a lot of people out in many situations, and I hope, you know, what I bring here today can help you guys out too. So thank you very much.
And I'm Geoff Davis. I work with UC San Diego's High Performance Wireless and Research and Education Network. My background is I've spent a lot of years doing recreational off-roading. And we spend a lot of time traveling to high altitude sites on, you know, various managed lands where there's a variety of terrain, variety of road conditions, and a lot of access issues during the various seasons that we have here in Southern California. You wouldn't think that we get weather down here, but we do.
Great. Well, thanks for those introductions. We'll get started with some of the content now. I'm going to hand it over to you, Brett.
All right. For early planning, I'd like to mention that for so many of my field jobs early on, not really part of the early planning at all. However, I want to remind the managers or PIs that they should bring all of their people up to speed to know why they're doing what they're doing out in the field and the choices that have been made for the equipment that are trying to bring us to and from safely. And so a lot of different considerations we need to go through in the early planning. What are we doing? What's the goal of the science? And the goal of the science, are we just going out and doing some field surveys? Are we building stuff? Are we going to need to bring up a lot of heavy equipment? And so these what's will determine what kind of equipment we need to accomplish that. Can we get away with some razors or other four-wheel off-road vehicles, or do we need bigger trucks? Do we need trailers? All of these things will be built together. Stephen, do you have any?
No, I agree with that. I mean, like you said, side by sides, or do you need a trailer? Do you need a truck? And yeah, it's important to know what you're doing. And yeah, absolutely.
And then obviously where we're going, are you working in your normal routine? So part of my work. We were at a field station in the middle of a wildlife refuge. We were, working 45 miles from home every day. And so this was a pretty easy thing to plan for compared to multiple days driving across Africa to get to a field camp and doing daily drives to different field sites. What are the conditions, the environment that we are going to have to deal with in these different situations? How we're going to put together our kit to protect us in the field. Along with that, what kind of permits do you need to do that? I was a Class C citizen in Tanzania. That was part of what we needed to do outside of just the vehicle side of things and insurance and all the other permits that we had to gather for that project. Stephen, what about your site?
With White
Sites?
Mountain? Yeah. Well, I was going to talk about some of the knowing the vehicle's capabilities and limitations, and I think you just keep going with what you're doing right now, and I'll chime in. But yeah,
Okay.
thank you.
And then as we're building out our team, I mean, before we even hire the team, we need to know what job skills, what we're accomplishing. So the job skills needed to be the on-site manager or, field team leader, who's bringing what skills with our positions as driver, who has experience driving, who else can drive that manual vehicle, and who we need to hire. We need to hire someone who can do these things. As we put together our team, we do really need to look at their experience and always have more than one operator, and making sure that our operators trade off and gain more experience, even if there is a real lead, making sure that everyone in the team gains experience with that. The other part of who's going that I like to think about is our medical pluses and minuses. Who has woofer or EMT training? Who are our medical assets, as well as our medical negatives? What kind of, especially for longer field camps, what kind of drugs or medical issues? Maybe people have to take drugs, medical drugs, not recreational. That's also a medical issue. And then, what we can do in the field if they do run out of their supplies, if we are stuck longer. These are things that I always like to think about for field camps, especially longer term projects.
Brett, can I jump in and just say also
course.
your mechanical assets. If you can have a mechanic or somebody with mechanic experience in your team for long-term field work via vehicle, it's a huge asset.
Yeah, I could not agree more. That's how I got myself to Africa. I was a team mechanic, as well as I had a master's in biology, but it was my mechanical skills that have got me to work on every continent. Actually, yeah, having those hard skills are important. And then how are we getting home? So obviously, it doesn't matter if we're going 2 hours from our UCs to do 4 hours of work and drive back 2 hours. We hope we're driving in and out. And same with a 2-month field camp. We hope that we're driving out. However, when things go wrong, that's when we really need to think about things. And in this day and age, there are emergency beacons that we all should have in our field kit, especially if we're going off-road outside of cell range. That activates the EMS. That's great, especially in North America, 911, obviously, if we have cell service. But what happens when we break an axle, or we get that second flat, or we're stuck on the side of a mountain for some other issue? Who are our resources? Are there mechanics or tow companies in the area that do go up into this backcountry setting? It's not always easy to find, and sometimes someone may have to drive 2 or 3 hours to get to a trailhead to then start the rescue, which leads to every time we go into the backcountry, we want to make sure that we have enough supplies to keep us safe for the time we think we're going to be there, as well as for kind of a medium worst case scenario where, we may have to stay because we're broken down. And so having these things in our kits to sustain everybody on the team for the extra 8 hours it might take for, Joe Schmo to drive in from Winnemucca or wherever it is.
Mhm.
Stephen?
Yeah, no, that's perfect. I wanted to reiterate something that you said about, getting the right person to be doing the right thing. Where it's like, for example, you don't want somebody who doesn't know how to tow to be towing, especially if you're gonna go in a downhill situation or something like that. People will get themselves in situations. So you need to designate people who have the knowledge and the experience to do certain things. Like you said, even driving standard, for example, you can either, do some damage to a vehicle or completely get somebody stuck. So you got to know what the person's capable of to designate them. And we have to do that a lot on our team, and generally the risk to responsibility type of thing. So that's extremely important. Putting someone in the wrong situation is a very, very dangerous thing, and we avoid that at all costs. So, and then the whole getting stuck thing is, wow, we're switching over.
Yeah, sorry about that. That was a
No, no,
bit
go.
up there, but I wanted to, you started to talk about mechanical skills and
Oh, yeah.
capabilities, so I thought it might be a good time to switch to this slide here.
Sure.
Certainly we could talk about recovery and some of those other issues later on. Brett, did you want to share a bit about vehicle maintenance and your approach for work, especially on the
Definitely.
research and when people are needing to get to sites for work?
So routine maintenance should go without saying. However, I have seen vehicles at the UC that have been well beyond their useful life or well beyond their routine maintenance schedules. And so we want to make sure, especially if we're going anywhere off-road, that our vehicles are in the best possible condition. We want to make sure that belts, hoses, oil, filters, and especially tires are in great shape. And so that is something before the field season starts or on whatever rotating basis for your sites. In New Mexico, it was always the beginning of the summer season, and then we had usually 2 field seasons through the fall. And so that kind of late spring, early summertime is when everything would be checked and make sure that our vehicles are as good condition as possible for certain. And then pre-trip versus daily, these things can kind of be, there's a lot of crossover, but pre-trip can also be an early season or an orientation with the vehicle, which we'll get into a little bit later. But for every vehicle, there should be a daily function check. Next slide. Or Breezy, I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's all right. I've just got a couple other things. So in my experience with the US Antarctic program and with like firefighting, for example, we have very comprehensive daily checks of those vehicles. So like in the last slide, that Delta, every single day I crawled all over that thing and checked all the belts, all the fluids, everything. And that's, I mean, it's partly the context, right? The vehicle itself is very old and literally held together by duct tape in places. And then the consequences are high because the environment is so extreme. So that's like daily checking, like getting in the engine and checking it out. And in fire, we did that too, right? We had our daily checklist and checked all the things. We also cleaned those vehicles daily, inside and out. And I don't find that that's part of the practice in a lot of field research is like daily inspections, daily cleanings. But I think it's really good to do because it increases the professionalism of your vehicle so that when you're in the field, like it's not a junk show in there and people see, UC Merced on the side of the vehicle and look in and know that that's a vehicle in good repair. And it also increases the professionalism and the trust of the team that vehicle is in good shape, right? When you step into a vehicle and it's just like filthy dirty, you go, I wonder the last time the tire pressure was changed or, was checked, oil was changed. So that's my 2 cents on that.
I would add, I noticed that somebody in the check-in list was driving in kelp, and that leads to another addendum on cleaning the vehicle, and that is spraying the salt water off of it. If you're going into areas where you're getting salt or sand, either road salt from snow or driving on the beach, you need to be sure to hose that thing down at the end of the day, unless you want the frame of the vehicle to look like Swiss cheese. Modern metallurgy is a lot better, but people from the East Coast especially can all tell their woeful stories of salt damage to the frame. So just reiterating that cleaning is a good idea.
And that's another lesson learned from fire, right? If you work in fire camp, your vehicle goes through a weed wash every day to keep from moving weeds around on the fire. And that's not something we usually do in research, right? But depending on the conditions of the site, that may be something to consider if you're working in disturbed areas or in places with lots of weeds or other invasive species like in marine. That might be something to consider.
Yeah, great point. And Breezy, you shared this checklist here as an example of a weekly vehicle checklist, right? Are these shared vehicles that you would use this for, or is this for you personally?
That came from White Mountain.
Okay.
That was just a weekly thing that we would do because we go up every week. We're 8 days on, 6 days off. And these are just a basic list of what they can look at and make sure they have everything with them, make sure like we have coolant, make sure that it's full, oil's good, just things that are like kind of low hanging fruit in a sense.
Mhm.
And what Breezy said about cleaning the vehicles, I kind of was like cringed a little bit because it is difficult to get people to clean vehicles sometimes, but it makes a huge difference in the pride that they take in the vehicle inside and out. So that's a great point. Thanks for bringing it up.
Yeah, I agree. Any last thoughts on this pre-trip inspections? Any other suggestions anyone wants to share?
I would, since I spend a lot of time driving on various land manager managed areas, I'm going through Forest Service, I'm going into BLM, I'm going into Indian reservations. The biggest thing I can suggest is make sure you have the keys, make sure you have the permission from the land managers, from all of the land managers that are necessary to get to your final location. That's kind of a big thing that, you know, you're like, oh, the truck's ready to go. Who's got the keys to the gate? And that sort of adds to another item that I would bring along that we'll mention later, but I wouldn't recommend cutting locks, but sometimes you have to.
Great, thanks, Geoff. And I think this is some more insights you wanted to share. And I think it's really important to remember that we're not just trying to get ourselves and our teams out there, but there's a lot of gear and equipment, and sometimes very complicated equipment that needs to get out to these field sites. So Geoff, if you could share a bit about what's going on in this picture.
Sure. So one of the things that my group does is we install microwave antennas on the top of mountaintops, on towers. And so we all have climbing experience, but we often have to get very bulky loads up to these locations, and we need to rent vehicles to do it sometimes. This is a two-wheel drive flatbed truck. It rides like you would expect a brick to ride, and it's a little bit tricky to get to some of these areas. One of the things that we ended up doing with this is we ratchet strap the heck out of these dishes. They're lightweight, but they're bulky and they will come loose if you don't tie them down. We also pre-ran the road. This was all destined for Santiago Peak, which is in Orange County. I mean, this is the most Southern California destinations, but it is also a pretty tall peak and the road has a tendency to get washed out. So we pre-ran the thing in some smaller vehicles and verified that we were going to be able to make all the corners. And we made sure that everything was secured during the drive. I have had antennas break loose at speed on a highway, and it's pretty exciting when that happens. Don't do it. So we made sure that we tied these things down. This was well secured. I have to thank Matt Norenberg from Scripps from doing a great job of tying things down. The license plate rattled off of this rental truck, but the antennas made it up to the top of the hill without a hitch. So that's just keep in mind that you want to secure everything in your cabin. You want to secure everything in the bed. And if you're going to get tilty on a road, stuff is going to shift on you.
Yeah, and if I can add real quick on that, absolutely. And getting out fairly often to check the straps, because if you're on a really bumpy road, 3, 4, 5 miles in, you're going to find yourself something's coming loose. You won't even know and you'll lose it. So stop often and check those straps if you're on bumpy roads.
Yeah, great suggestion. All right, we're going to transition a little bit into training and vehicle orientations as well. If people in the chat have any examples of resources related to training or places they have learned a lot of good information, feel free to share that as well, because I do think that, you know, different jobs people have had, different terrain, different countries they've lived in, you know, there's different approaches to how people are learning this. Some of us are learning, you know, from friends and family growing up, and some of us, you know, a lot of grad students don't even have their own vehicles and drive much at all these days, and they're learning everything on the job, right? So there's a huge range of skills among our teams. I think it's important to recognize. Brett, would you like to get started on this one again?
Sure. As far as training, and especially for building field teams, I want everyone to have knowledge about how we drive the vehicle and how we actuate four-wheel drive, how we're able to do what we need to do in the field, even if we think that somebody doesn't want to drive. They still need to go through this and learn, and that includes going through the whole checklist and knowing when they're checking that antifreeze that they're only doing it with a cool engine, knowing everything that's in the toolbox, because when I ask for a 1/2-inch drive, 3/4 inch socket, I want to get one if I'm lying underneath the vehicle and not have to, tell somebody, describe it and get them through that. So I think as much time as possible that you can spend with orientation, you'll be much better off. And that's really even before we talk about driving at all. Anybody have anything else to add about orientation?
I could add something on that, and it really goes on with what that's saying about knowing your vehicle's capabilities and limitations, and making sure. And I've seen this a lot when people rent cars or people get cars from the UC. Is like, do you know if it's a 2-wheel drive, it's a front wheel drive or a rear wheel drive? Makes a big difference if you're going through situations. If you have an all-wheel drive or a 4x4, and if it has 4-low, for example, and knowing how to instigate that and get it into 4-low and do all that stuff is very, very important. And just acquainting yourself with your vehicle before you actually go up there, driving it around before you're in a situation, learning how to do this, knowing if you got downhill assist or downshifting, it's all really, really great before you get into a situation or before you're actually on those dirt roads is very important.
I would add that knowing how to defeat traction control is a good feature on modern vehicles.
Yes,
especially in sand. That's been a big issue for a lot of driving on sand, is that modern vehicles have all sorts of crazy traction nannies. And when you get into situations where you want wheel slip, you need to be able to turn that off. Otherwise, the engine will just sort of die down on you and you don't know why it's not going anywhere. So one more thing to check.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with that. There's nothing more frustrating than trying to get through a muddy patch and having your vehicle apply brakes and stopping you in the middle of the muddy patch. The other thing about knowing your vehicle's capabilities is making sure it all works in the front country, also to actually do a test to make sure that it does lock into 4-wheel drive. And it's not always straightforward, but if you get into a parking lot and you can feel that it's now suddenly harder to turn, it has actuated. You can tell that you're getting power to that front axle and things are changing. There are times when you go into 4-wheel drive and the transfer case is actually broken. This has happened, or you're not locked in your hubs, and learning all of these things before you get into the field is important. And that doesn't have to be a daily check, but certainly an early season check.
A super basic one is figuring out how to put on your chains before you need your chains. I mean, I think most people know this, but then they don't do it. So.
Yeah, good point. We see that on the road all the time, people fumbling, and then they're cold and their hands, they lose dexterity and they're just tangled. And yeah, it's better to practice that stuff in nice, warmer conditions and drier conditions and understand. I absolutely will agree with that one. I wanted to point out this picture here is this is a UC Berkeley vehicle, and that's Zach from Blue Oak, doing a training down at Hollister Hills State Vehicle Recreation Area. And a few of us evaluated a course a few years ago. There were some participants from A&R and from Santa Cruz and Merced and Berkeley. We came together and did an actual all-day course with a company with a very direct name called the Driving Company. But it was incredibly valuable, and it was mandatory that you trained in the vehicles that you use. You had to bring your own vehicles, and it really helped to understand the capabilities and limitations and to practice on the vehicles you use. So there are, there are courses like that available around California. What I did like about that one is they do a lot of training for public agencies and CAL FIRE, and there's a number, I think our Berkeley seismology lab has used them as well, for people that need to access field sites for their job or for emergency response. So it's a bit of a different focus and more conservative, I would say, than like Jeep clubs and people that are going out there and trying to find extreme environments. So I definitely think that actual hands-on training from professionals can be valuable for a lot of people as well. If this is going to be your career and you feel that you don't have the background or skills and knowledge, just doing a course like that can really give you a lot of confidence and understanding of your vehicle.
And Sarah, are those courses fairly inexpensive? Is that what I saw online?
Yeah, I feel like it was maybe, it was a similar price to like Wilderness First Aid or something like that, maybe like $150. I think if you go in a group, there's different rates. They have some public courses and then they'll do them for specific agencies as well. I know that Claudia at UCLA has been looking for some in Southern California as well. So that's something that if people have, positive experiences and know of good trainers, that's a great thing to share among this network. If others have taken courses, feel free to add that in the chat, because I do sometimes think evaluating them and understanding like the scope and the skills is really important. Just going out on like a Jeep club type of orientation is not necessarily going to be as valuable as a training like this. And definitely it's something that if more people are interested in, we could try to coordinate more training as well. In that group, we had quite a range of abilities as well. We had some grad students that barely drove at all. We had people that have been driving for decades, and I think everyone took positive things out of it. Yeah, I can share more at the end when we talk about some resources. So let's move on to other preparations now. This slide right here was provided to me by Christine Fine from University of North Dakota. I heard a presentation from her recently at UC Santa Barbara in the spring, and she was presenting on lone worker precautions and just investments they've made, because they have a lot of researchers heading out long periods where there's not a lot of traffic, heading across Wyoming and just having incidents where they were getting stuck and not necessarily having accidents, but needing to recover vehicles and having delays and just, not being able to communicate. And so they really invested a focus this past year on vehicle safety kits. So this is just an example for that setting of the safety kits and what they were preparing. I do think it's important that they are specific to, the hazards that you expect, the setting, how far you are from resources, like customization is really important here. And with that, I'll pass it over to Steve to talk about at White Mountain Research Center. You saw some pictures already of their site and the various elevations they're heading up, what they carry in their vehicles here in California.
Thank you, Sarah. So I think that kit that Sarah just showed is an excellent kit, and it's a complementary to this kit, and that kit actually has a lot of items you will need if or when you get stuck and you need to survive, in a sense, if you got to overnight and everything. And the kit that I'm showing here is more about how to get yourself out of a bit of a pinch if you do get yourself into a situation. And I'm not going to go through every single thing on the list, but I'll talk about the things that seem to be most important or things that might need explanation. And so we carry all these kits in every one of our vehicles, and mostly we're driving up to high elevation, 14,000 feet. And the nice thing about these kits is that they're concise, they're portable is a big thing too. They can be moved from vehicle to vehicle, and they're all basically self-contained. We've loaned these kits out to people before when we weren't using them, to be like, hey, listen, I'm going up here. I was like, take this kit with you, trust me. And inevitably they end up using it. It's a really great resource. And so just to run through it real quick, we got obviously our first aid kit that should be with every vehicle regardless. Big things that we use: can Fix-A-Flat does wonders. Absolutely. You tear, I mean, aside from a sidewall tear, you can throw a can of Fix-A-Flat in a tire and drive it all the way out. It's a great resource to have. Another thing is, I don't know how many are familiar with using plug kits or patch kits. You can buy them online very, very cheap. You get holes in tires all the time, and you can just, plug them right on site. It's pretty basic. It's pretty easy, but I would suggest looking up a YouTube tutorial on plug kits and getting one for the vehicles, because endless times you'll be using these things in the field for sure.
I'd like to interject though, when you get
Please.
the plug kits, they always say for off-road use only, don't keep them on your highway vehicle for a long time. That's I guess the biggest exclamation point on plug kits, is that a self-applied patch shouldn't be used on highway any longer than it has to be.
That's true. Like the ones you'll get the stations, they'll fix them. It's true, definitely, but they do work very well, and you can put multiple plugs in holes. I've put up to 8 plugs in one hole, which is pretty fascinating just to get you out. Another thing is the pump down here at the bottom. There's a pump that connects directly to the battery. This is great for helping other people out, helping yourself out. And we talked earlier about if you ever have to air down your tires for snow or sand, don't air down your tires unless you have a pump to bring the tire pressure back up. It's very, very important. And they're fairly affordable, and they will save you, man. I'll tell you. Other things in there, jumper cables, obvious. We use jumper cables a lot because we're on roads where there tends to be other traffic and cars. We will see them most of the times, but what they have now, which are great, are these portable jump starters. We should get them at White Mountain, and they literally, you put them to your battery, and they work. They're about twice the size of a cell phone. You connect them to your battery, you hit start, and it shocks the hell out of it. And they're dangerous, but they will start a car, and you don't need another vehicle. And they're great things to have in kits if you're going to be way off alone where you're not going to be seeing other vehicles, because jumper cables ain't going to do anything unless you got something to jump it from. So that's a great thing to have in a kit that you won't be seeing here. Another thing I wanted to mention in there is, you see that wooden block up there, it seems pretty, normal or whatnot, but it's a 4x6, about 10 to 12 inches long. Keep that in your truck at all times, because if you get a flat tire and you need to change it and you're off camber, you're on a hill, you have a rocky ground or sandy ground, and you put the jack down. I've seen it so many times where people jack their cars up, they take the tire off, the car starts to slide, it comes off the jack, it damages the car, or it could damage somebody really badly. So that block, you just kind of put it down before you put your jack down, kind of shake it into the ground, get a good level surface, and then start jacking up from there, because it's just, it can get dangerous quick if you don't plan properly. And it also doubles as a chock. If you're on a hill, you can throw it behind your tire and keep yourself from rolling. So it's a simple thing, but it does wonders. And we would never go anywhere without a tow strap. I think, was it Geoff who was mentioning a tow strap earlier, but it, between you, other vehicles, helping people out, mud, snow, whatnot, it's just, you shouldn't go anywhere if you're going to be in kind of off-road, rocky, sandy, snowy, anything like that. Get a long one. They work great. They had a 20-foot tow strap. Don't get a short one, because sometimes you got to be out of that drift, but great thing to have. Water, of course, in every single kit, in every single car. Great if you get into a pinch. It's also great if you have a coolant leak. You can put water into your radiator or into your coolant, as long as it's not boiling hot and you're going to hurt yourself. But the other thing is, if you do put coolant into your system or put water into your system, make sure you add coolant later on, because if you winterize it with water, you're going to break everything. We've done that. And other things that are super essential: zip ties and baling wire and duct tape. Those 3 things will get you out of so many situations. You can hold hose clamps on with it. You can hold bumpers on with it. You can, it's just amazing when you get creative when you're in the field. I mean, what do they say? What is it? Necessity is the mother of invention. So you'd be surprised how, what you come up with. And then other basic things are just, your ratchet straps, your bungee straps. You never know when you're going to need those things. One thing, if you live in a desert climate, spare wiper. You never know. You all of a sudden you turn your wipers on, you haven't used them in a year and you can't see anything. So that's a nice thing to have in the kit too. So, but yeah, I mean, this list here, if you guys want, I can have the full list, throw it up there and you guys can, you know, take a screenshot of it, or we can just, you know, get it to you somehow just to see what we put in the kit. And it, as Sarah said, it's very, very specific to where you're going to be. If you're working in an environment in a wooded area or an ocean area or a mountainous area, they're all going to be different kits. So figure out what works best for you. And I would keep it consolidated in a box like that, so that it can move from vehicle to vehicle. It can, if you have to abandon a vehicle, you can take it with for another vehicle. It's just nice to have it all in one place so that it can just get up and go. Yeah, aside from that, the one other thing that we have that we haven't used yet, and I don't want to use it, is it's an accident form from the UC. If something happens and there is an accident, it has all the procedural, what you have to go through, the information you have to get, just so you know you don't miss anything when that happens. And it's a good thing to keep in the kit. God forbid, you know, something does happen. So that's pretty much what we use here at White Mountain. And we're usually driving the same road up to the station and back to the station. So we know exactly what we're going to be coming in contact with. And this has been working well for us for years. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. Great insights. And then I appreciate you sharing this vehicle checklist as well, that you have your different vehicles there and that you're checking off and making sure that you have these supplies available for all your whole fleet there.
And I know
I have something to add.
Please.
Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, so when you're making these kits, one thing we used to do at the U.S. Antarctic program that I love and have never seen anywhere else is you put together the kit with the checklist and you close the box and you tape it shut with labeling tape with your initials, SD, and the date. And that way, you know, everything's there, because people will start to pilfer your first aid kit and take a bungee and whatever, and then you don't know what's in there anymore. But if that tape's broken, then you know it's been used. And then before it goes back out into the field, it gets that same, you go through the checklist, you inspect everything, you tape it shut with your initials. So that's a good system to use for these types of kits, so that you know, just by looking in the car, you don't have to like inspect it every time, that you've got a full kit.
That's a great idea, because we've come across that. Obviously, we keep a checklist inside the kit, but sure as the day is long, we open it up and say, "Rrr." So
Yeah.
yeah.
And you don't want to open it and discover that the patch kit's gone or used up when you need it out in the field, right? And you were assuming it was going to be in there. And then one other thing from the USAP is that for survival kits, each person gets their own survival kit, right? Which this is context dependent. That, you know, those scenarios are every person needs a sleeping bag, every person needs a, you know, MRE or whatever. So that's something to consider, right? There's a vehicle safety kit, but does each person also need a safety kit? And we're like presenting all of this, like just the driving part, but obviously this is all put into the context of your field safety plan. So, yeah.
I love those additions, Breezy. Thanks.
Yeah, and I would add to just clarify a couple of items on here. I personally have used the kinetic style recovery straps significantly more than the static straps. I see that looks like a pretty static strap in the picture.
It is.
I prefer the kinetic straps, because if you've got two vehicles that don't have a winch, you're probably going to get a running start to get the other vehicle out. And the kinetic strap's a good way to not rip a bumper off. If you do try to yank a vehicle with a running start, you will rip the bumper off with the static strap. I also am not a big fan of using straps with hooks. I prefer to bring D-ring shackles. I see Brett shaking his head. Perhaps he's got some different experience than I've got.
No, I ripping a bumper off, really want to make sure that people know not to use bumpers and to use proper towing points and get onto frames. This is the recovery is a whole nother subject, and shackles are great. There are a lot of soft shackles in use now for similar things. That way we aren't throwing a 1.5 pound piece of metal through the air, that everything is soft. It really just depends on where you are, but definitely should never pull a bumper off, because a bumper should never be pulled.
Agreed. Yeah, I'm saying bumper, but you know, you will pull an anchor strap off or an ankle point off of a frame. as well if you are using a static strap and you get a running start. That's just bad for the vehicle. So if you're going to use a static tow strap, don't do something with the running start.
That's a good point.
The other thing I see in here is you've got a nice air compressor. That Viair unit is a pretty decent one. One of the things that you'll notice if you go buy a cheap air compressor is that the duty cycles on those things aren't, they'll overheat on the cheaper air compressors, and you'll be there all day putting air in your tires after the silly thing overheats. So don't skimp on the air compressor. At least, you probably want to target something at the $40-50 range as your baseline. Otherwise,
to add to that, I would shoot for something that says it can do 80 psi. It's not going to do 80 psi. That thing says it'll do 80, and it does probably 50, and that's what you're going to get. So, what's that?
Still do a bicycle tire at 80.
Yeah, maybe do a bicycle tire. That's a good point. But as far as a car, yeah, just you want to get something that'll definitely get you up to at least 30 psi.
All right, thanks, guys. Great added comments there. Let's go forward and talk a little bit about weather.
Oh gosh.
Yeah, so California has had its share of weather extremes lately. Weather forecasting, assessing road conditions. What tips do you have for people here? Do you want to share, first of all, some points on these photos here? I think these are from you, Stephen, these first two.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. There's weather forecasting and assessing road conditions. Gosh, I mean, I have a bunch of stuff written here, but let me just talk about these photos real quick and what to do and what not to do. And it's just, people just assume that the vehicle's going to go through the mud and it's going to go through the snow. And my experience is that the water's always deeper and the snow's always deeper in the drifts. It's never anything that is just, you get in there and you're like, why did I do that? I mean, this van over here on the left is a 2-wheel drive van. And I mean, I just pulled them out and I was like, and by the way, I can tell you the 3 mistakes that these guys made was, one is that they shouldn't have been there in the first place. The other one is it's a 2-wheel drive van. And the next thing is that road dead ends in about 50 feet. So regardless if they made it through, they'd have to come back through it again to hit a turnaround. So just knowing your road, knowing where you're going, and when you come across something like that and you do want to cross it, definitely get out of your vehicle and check the depth. See what the drift looks like. Get your heel into it. Is it soft? Is it hard? Like, walk into the mud, walk into the water. Yeah, you're going to get dirty, but sometimes the puddles, they don't seem so deep, but there's actually ruts underneath where people have driven through them a bunch of times. So your tires are going to fall about 8 inches deeper. If you have a dog, send your dog into the water. It's perfect. The dog loves it. And you can be like, oh, it's 3 feet deep. I'm not going in there. So that's a great thing. And then that center picture is just a great picture of like how to be pretty much completely unprepared for a situation. I mean, there's those flip-flops and tank tops. That's at 10,500 feet. There's no one there. We happen to pull them out with the snowcat. And, it's just one of those things where it's like, what were you thinking? But so be aware of that before you cross anything, that it's going to be a little bit deeper than you always expect. And then, but I'm done talking about those pictures. Sarah, did you want to talk about these two on the right, or? Yeah,
sure. I added these 2 photos from Inyo County Sheriff's Office from an incident that happened this winter. And there was quite a few news stories, this winter, given the snowpack and people getting trapped. But I thought this one in particular, I think has some important points. It was an elderly man driving by himself that took a wrong turn off of 168. And was out there, I believe, for 7 days before he was found and survived. Was prepared to I think he had like pastries or something in the car and water and whatever, and survived, but was very difficult to find because of the conditions and because he went off on a less traveled area. And in the picture at the bottom is actually his vehicle from afar. It looked like it looked just like a rock, or like it was very difficult to spot, right? So I think it's important reminders about, even within California, there are so many incredibly remote areas. And if you don't know where you're going and you take a wrong turn and get off in some remote areas, It could be quite a while till someone can find you. So being self-prepared, and then also just, anything that you could do for visibility, having any kind of communication device, obviously, so that people can find you more easily. But I think, there's a number of lessons learned from incidents like that. Anyone else want to share anything from this past winter, incidents they're aware of, people getting trapped and stuck? And
I wanted to expand on some of the weather forecasting real quick if we had
go ahead.
just with my experience up in the mountains and at elevation is like, first, before you do anything, obviously it sounds obvious, but check the weather, make sure you have a reliable app, check it for the long term, see how it fits in with your schedule. When you're at elevation, if they say there's a 30% or greater chance that there's going to be precipitation, it's more like an 80% chance. You're going to get hit with something. That doesn't mean you should change your trip because of it. But if that weather is saying there's a 70+% chance and you're at 10,000 feet or above, just reorganize your trip. I swear you can get in a situation really, really bad, especially at the bookends, at the early season, and more importantly, the late season, where you're up there, a storm rolls in, you get your car stranded, you walk away from it, it's there for the whole entire season. We've dealt with that before. And when you leave a car in the snow untended, it's basically shot. So things like that. I use NOAA, the weather app on my phone. You can pinpoint specific areas up in the mountains. It'll give you a pretty good idea of what's going on. And that's a great thing. And another thing to do is you can check road conditions before you go. In California, we use Caltrans has a good road condition site. It shows what closures are. They're pretty well updated, but it will definitely tell you what's closed and what to avoid. And then another thing is if you're going to parks or wilderness areas, there are ranger stations and other visitor centers you can call in advance. And we get phone calls all the time here at White Mountain, like, oh, can I get to the bristlecones? And it's like, no, you can't get to the bristlecones. But like people calling ahead is better than them just going out and getting stuck up there. So just knowing where you're going and knowing what resources you can reach out to before you actually go there is a great way to avoid, any issue. So that's all I want to say. Thank you.
I'd take an opportunity here to flog one of my projects. The Alert California project has a bunch of cameras at high altitude for doing fire lookout stuff. It's great. We've got over 1,000 cameras throughout the state of California. And if you want to see what it looks like at altitude in your area, go to alertcalifornia.org and you probably can find a camera within the area. And that's just another one of those visual checks that we do when we go to tower sites. A lot of aircraft operators also check with our cameras for air conditions when they're, especially the Orange County sheriffs, San Diego sheriffs, and things like that. Just one more resource.
And then one more thing that I've started thinking about more recently is particulates. With all the fires in different areas, there's a link through the NOAA website to get to fire conditions and particulate. And sometimes in the high country or on certain sides of mountains, you can really be in dangerous air conditions, and want to think about that depending on your work and whether you wait for those southerly winds to come in or what have you. But something I didn't think about until the last 5 years.
Yeah, good points.
And visibility, right? I mean, just because it's not going to snow enough to preclude you from driving on a road doesn't, like from a friction standpoint, doesn't mean that it's going to not be snowy and windy enough that you just can't see anything. Or you get in there and then you can't see anything and you can't get out. All these things with weather, even avalanche forecasting, right? Like some of these like this road on this slide, that snowpack's isothermal, it's not going to slide probably at this point, but checking the avalanche forecast and making sure you're not going to be driving underneath things that might slide behind you and get you trapped.
Icefall is also a big issue. If you look on that left-hand picture, that's San Diego County. We get weather here. We were actually doing a helicopter survey of this particular tower site because the road driving up there was too dangerous to go to. Coming off of that tower were ice chest sized chunks of ice, like 3 foot, 4 foot chunks of ice coming off of that tower, and the fence is crushed on the left hand side. So those are sorts of things that you should look out for with just, hey, should I even be going to the site once I get there? Am I going to be able to perform the work that I need to perform?
Yeah, I think all of these pictures really make people think about what you would do in this situation if you come across it, but also, if you have this information in advance to affect your planning. I think it is important to have information, be prepared, but also have contingency plans, right? Like knowing what alternate routes you have, adding flexibility to your schedule so that you can, maybe not push through some of these situations, or if you get stuck, it just like reduces the stress level if you have a little bit more flexibility in your schedule, which is a nice wish list for all of us. But I think the way that sometimes people schedule their field work, it's like there's no room for error at all, right? And you're kind of setting yourself up for a really difficult trip and situation if things don't go smoothly. So I wanted to allot some time right now just for the four of you to share some insights from your own experience on decision making in the field, and when to turn back, some of the criteria that you consider, either from these photos or other experiences. I think those are just incredibly valuable insights for others that also have to make decisions when they're out and about. So let's see, maybe Breezy, you could start us off.
Yeah, I can start. One thing I think about a lot is, and this is from fire, escape routes and safety zones. So can I get out? Is there another way that I can get out if I can't get out the way I came in? What's the fastest way out? I mean, all of these things, right? Like imagine you go up a road and it's one way in, one way out, and then you have a medical emergency up there and you're trying to get out and there's a tree down in the road, right? So just knowing your terrain and knowing how all the escape routes that you could possibly use, or if you're gonna need to, call a helicopter or something for a medical evacuation, like those kinds of things are all part of the planning ahead part. And if you find yourself in the field and you're going, oh, I want to improvise, right? This wasn't part of our plan, but maybe we should go down that road and look for Valencia. Think about, okay, do I actually have enough information to do that safely? I was on a fire and they sent me out on this road to go check something. And I was like, that's one way in, one way out. And there's all these snags and I don't have a chainsaw. So I'm not going to go because I could get stuck up there. And it might be minor, right? I'm just stuck up there sheltering in place. Nobody gets hurt. The vehicle doesn't get hurt. I'm just stuck. But that's like a day lost of work, right? So there's these risks that aren't necessarily like major accidents to also weigh. Like if you get yourself into a pickle, you're losing a lot of time, right? And a lot of time that you could be doing work. And then safety zones too, like, is there a place I can shelter in place if things turn bad? Like if I go up this snowy road and the weather forecast is great, but all of a sudden it closes in, is there a cabin up there? Right? Is there shelter up there that I could use to weather through or not? And that can all like weigh into your decision making in a holistic way. Yeah, I think that's what I have to say there.
I would interject a little bit more to expand on your fire experience. When you're on site, especially this summer, we're probably gonna have some big fires again this summer. One of the things that we encounter is limited access to sites and lightning strikes somewhat nearby. We, if the weather is looking like there's lightning, we may squelch a trip. If we're in the middle of a trip and lightning starts striking a little ways away and we know that there's only one road out, we get the hell off the mountain. And that's something to keep in mind, that you are aware of your ways in and out, as you stated, and that you are watching for changing conditions such as lightning strikes.
Yeah, they've had entrapments in Southern California on roads because of those sundowners, right? The upslope winds in the evening. So those are things to think about, like not getting trapped by fire or, something weird. We're in that kind of era now with weather in California.
I'd like to add for the when to turn back part of this all is I kind of always, two things I always do is the risk to reward ratio basically is one of them. It's like, how much risk do I want to take and what am I getting out of it? How much farther can I possibly go? When you're going in or going out, if you're in a situation and you go through that situation and you come upon another situation, generally the next situation is going to be a worse situation. And at that point you say, you know what, how many of these can I do before I'm stuck? And you choose to turn around. We do it often with when we're in the snowcat and we're up there and we're going in, it's like we have a turnaround time for one. And the other thing is we say, what's the point? You know, like, are we going to risk our lives to get to a station where if we waited a week, it might melt out and we can work the snow better, things like that. And another thing with that is, and I know you guys were talking about schedule, and it is so difficult because you schedule things so tightly, and it's hard to do, but not being in a rush is a really good way. I mean, you get yourself in situations all the time by like being in a rush. Something happens with the vehicle, you try to use the vehicle to correct the mistake you made, and you end up making it worse. And it's sometimes getting out and like, you know, doing some manual labor work to get that vehicle moving again, things like that. So not being in a rush is a great way to, you know, remedy any issues. So, but I know it's hard for everyone, including myself.
And sometimes the fastest way is on foot. Sometimes the fastest way is not a vehicle, right? Like, you have to like think about these things in a holistic way, like right tool, right place, right time. How do we best set ourselves up for success in like the total field safety context?
Good point.
And that I always try to sandbag a little bit when I'm driving. If conditions continue to get worse, I'll drive in two-wheel drive as long as I can before going to four-wheel drive. And if conditions get rougher and I'm losing traction, do I really want to deal with airing down and trying to go? At that point, I may decide that that's when I cut it off. Or if you have locking differentials, just depending on what your vehicle has, or those tire chains to make it through a small patch of snow on the level. I mean, I wouldn't put those tire chains on and start spinning out and getting stuck. You know, that's the last possible way that you're going to get yourself out of there. And if it really takes those chains, do I want to deal with that? And then what happens if I lose momentum going up that hill? What happens if I get bogged down? So I try to always leave, you know, one step up for extrication and then turning around going home before I really push anything.
Absolutely.
Yeah, can somebody talk about that off-camber Tacoma there that slid off that snowfield?
I was about to talk about that. That guy should have turned around before he left his house, I think. That's a two-wheel drive truck, first of all.
Oh, geez.
Yeah, so he was up there. He had called CHP. I came up with the snowcat, and I couldn't pull him out because I'd be dragging his axles uphill. So what we did, we strapped him from the front and we tried to pull him. And I was like, listen, man, you're just going to rail slide. And he was insistent, like, pull me out. I said, man. So what I ended up doing, I plowed the whole road for him so that he could call a proper tow truck that has dual winches and cranes so they could literally pull him up and out. So I cleared about 20 feet of the snow to the left of the car there. And he he went down with the CHP, and the cop actually was holding the car and the door for him to get stuff because he was so off camber that we were afraid it was going to go over. And he spent the night there. Here's the other thing with this. If he stopped before that snowdrift, got out of his car and walked to the horizon right there, which is literally only, I don't know, 200 meters or so, 300 meters, he would notice that it's just snow. That's as far as he would have gotten was the top of it. He would have made it another, you know, couple hundred meters before he would have had to turn around and go back through that again. So like, you know, that risk to like reward ratio, get out and look. And well, he was in a two-wheel drive. So that was just, like I said, he shouldn't have been there to begin with, but that was a fun day. He took about 3 hours out of my time.
I was going to say, even in a four-wheel drive at that point where he's out on the road, he's just going to keep sliding downhill. I don't care if you're steered to the left, it's going to go right.
And that's the same thing that happens if you're pulling him. I'll tell you right now.
Yeah.
My rule of thumb is if I have to cross snow in the summer, right? I'm on a dirt road and I have to cross snow and it's not winter, right? And I'm not prepared for snow. I get out of the vehicle immediately and walk a quarter mile. Where's the next snow patch? Is it bigger? Is it smaller? Like, you know, just scout. And usually there's another snow patch that's worse, and then another snow patch that's worse. And then I just go, okay, not today. I need to wait a week.
I wish more people did that. I really do wish more people did that.
I mean, don't be afraid to use the quads God gave you. Like, get out of your car and go look around. This is situational awareness, right? You don't have to stay with the vehicle. One other tool I use when to turn back is I start writing the accident write-up in my head, right? Like, UC Merced employee crossed snowfield in XYZ vehicle in order to do this work, and then this happened. And then I start going, oh, that would really, no thanks.
That'll look
I'm
great
good.
on the cover of the Sacramento Bee.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
I love that, Breezy. Yeah, like a little pause to be like, how am I going to explain this decision? And is it, and your point is absolutely important, Stephen, like the risk to reward. I mean, are you proving that you can get through it? Like, what is the point of actually proceeding in some situations? And I do unfortunately hear stories as well where there's field course instructors or there's people that are leaders that just want to prove themselves as well and get their team there and make poor decisions as well as the leader. And then you're kind of getting everyone into this bad situation. So
Yeah.
I think it's much easier to defend being conservative and taking, the more conservative choice, turning around and, whatever your learning objectives are, the research goals, sometimes it's just going to have to wait, but you can justify that decision often much more easily than why you push through. Any last thoughts on this, on decision making in the field that anyone wants to share? I think some excellent points there. I do want to spend a little bit of time talking about some specific accidents. This one happened in Baja, Mexico. That's a UC Santa Barbara vehicle. This was shared by Eric Hessel, the dive safety officer at UC Santa Barbara. This happened a while back, but was en route to a remote dive site in Mexico. I believe there were 2 vehicles caravanning down, and this vehicle flipped. It was quite serious. There were 2 injured with lacerations and head trauma. They were in an area where they did not have cell reception, but were fortunate that someone came by locally that first of all spoke some English, but also had cell reception or was able to get to nearby cell reception and summon emergency medical services. As Eric described it, also they were fortunate that they were able to evacuate the 2 injured people from a nearby airstrip before it got dark. So that was somewhat fortunate that they were able to get people out and get medical care fairly quickly, and everyone survived. It's certainly, looking at this picture, it's horrific. It looks, it certainly could have been worse. He also shared, I'm not sure if, I don't believe Eric's on the call today, but he also shared some important lessons learned from this that I think are relevant for a lot of projects and a lot of settings. So a lot of times people put a lot of effort into, their actual field site and, for example, in diving and boating, everything on the marine ops side, they had preparations in place, but getting to your field site is perhaps where people are more vulnerable. And so he had noted, ensuring effective communications are established for the entire expedition, not just at the point of your destination. For example, Brett had mentioned beacons, sat phones, inReaches. There's a lot of technology out there that's appropriate to be carrying so that you can stay in communication and summon help if needed.
The department might have a loaner sat phone too, and if it doesn't, and you do a lot of field work, consider getting a loaner sat phone for departmental use. Yeah,
great point, Jeffrey. I think that's becoming more and more the standard and really like the minimum. Many of our campuses do offer some loaner programs. We certainly don't have enough, for all the uses, and for people that are going out regularly, have large projects. It's definitely preferred to invest in them yourselves and keep your contacts and, everyone get familiar with the equipment. But yeah, good point. I think in this incident also, there were some language barriers that are important to think about when you're traveling internationally. Evacuation considerations with your plan, with your plans, a lot of helicopters, remote flights, they're not going to be able to happen after dark. So there's going to be some restrictions in being able, if you can't get out quickly, to shelter in place overnight until you're able to be evacuated. Eric also shared having insurance cards with critical numbers. I like how Stephen mentioned in his kit, actually having those forms, like having it with your first aid kit, having it with your kit, just put that stuff in there. So if you do ever need it, you have those numbers. He also pointed out with this incident, a lesson was having the converters and being able to charge your cell phones from from the hospital, having, just again, some preparations, especially when you're in another country, even though, I mean, they drove to this site from California, but going into Mexico, there certainly are some unique considerations there. Related to Geoff's example earlier, ensuring equipment in the vehicle is secure. A lot of our field vehicles, they're taking out all kinds of gear and equipment. If you're in an accident, all that stuff can shift and create additional hazards, so taking the time to secure your equipment, as you can see from that picture, that contributed as well. And then knowing insurance, Brett had mentioned this before, taking the time to understand what insurance coverage you have, if additional needs to be, obtained, and then who is covered, knowing who can drive, having backup drivers. And then of course, driving conservatively, ensuring drivers don't become too tired or drive for too long, having multiple operators. Those are all some excellent lessons learned that Eric shared from UC Santa Barbara. And others on this call may be familiar with this incident as well and are welcome to share. But I wanted to make sure we took time to acknowledge that and point out some lessons learned.
I did want to add in here, since I'm seeing a bunch of stuff in the chat about communications devices, just if you've got multiple vehicles on the trip, maybe having a set of family band radios, something like that for vehicle to vehicle communication. So you're not sitting there fiddling with your texts on your cell phone while you're trying to drive or relying on cell phone signal. Just having vehicle to vehicle comms is useful, and it's useful at the site as well.
Yeah, great.
Definitely. And one other thing I meant to mention before that I did not was to have a check-in schedule. And this doesn't matter if you're just going in the field for 2 hours in and out, like working on the refuge I used to work on. We had sign-ins every time we left a public road and went into the refuge, and you signed out when you got off those dirt roads. But to have a check-in, check-out for every day's operations, and even if you are driving down to Guerrero Negro, that you have a time you're calling back to say, hey, we're all there. And that way you can get somebody looking for you if you're not there. And so field camps in the Antarctic, we call in once a day, no matter what kind of field camp we are in. That was a minimum. And so I think that people should do something like that. And within reach, you just say, hey, all okay, everybody woke up or everybody's gone to bed, however you want to arrange it. But daily check-ins are important for field work. And then going into this accident, a couple of years ago, I-70 was closed in Colorado, a 2.5-hour delay to pass through a 20-some mile section of canyon that was closed. And this guy had Waze or something in a Greyhound bus, and I had driven to the top here, and there was a man standing beside the road who got cell phone coverage, which I was amazed. I didn't think there was any cell coverage up where we were. And he had driven already like 20 miles up switchbacks and terrifying road, but flat. It was all very, very well maintained to where he had to turn and go on a real off-road, and he cracked the oil pan and killed the bus and leaked gallons of oil all over. 21 people had to be evacuated suddenly as the sun is setting. And just shows you how lack of planning and lack of awareness of your roads before you get there can really impact everyone's conditions. Nobody had supplies. They weren't going to spend a night in the field, but we should plan on these things because you can still kill your truck in some manner in the field and be prepared. So everyone got off the mountain safely. One woman had a medical issue, but just it was the strangest thing I've ever seen in the mountains.
Yeah. And let's see, I think we had one other accident that or close call, I would say.
Yeah. This was an accident. These guys were so lucky. So this is up in Silver Canyon, right outside of Bishop. And these people did so many things wrong again. This is, I don't know if it was a rented RAV4 or if it's just a RAV4. It's an all-wheel drive vehicle. And it was a family of 5. And they were, so I was pulling down the road, and the first thing I thought was, why the hell would someone park there? Then I got closer. I said, oh, they're not parked. And they're over high centered on that berm. And you can see to the right of the car, there's the road pointing to the right. They came down that canyon, and that canyon doesn't go anywhere. That canyon isn't a canyon you should be riding up. It doesn't. They were just joyriding, and they had a baby in the car, and it was really just took a lot for me not to yell at them because they were okay. So what they ended up doing, they came down, they were pumping their brakes. They didn't downshift, I'm guaranteeing, and they burnt their brakes out. And the whole family went careening down here and ended up fortunately hitting this high brushes or river right there, a small stream. And it could have been so much worse if that was a face, if that was a rock facade or something like that. It could have been, I could have came on that scene and I could have been, not that it has to do with me being traumatized, but that would have been, but it would have been a completely different thing. A family of 5 and a baby, I would not want to come across something like that. So I think a lot of the things getting from this is, if you don't need to go somewhere, don't go somewhere. And the other thing is, like, I don't know if you guys know this, but it's important if you're driving in mountainous areas, use your gears, downshift. Do not rely wholeheartedly on your brakes. Put it into 4, put it into 3, feel it, see how it feels, put it into 2 if you have to, let it roll and pump your brakes, and it'll save you. I've seen this time and time again. Trucks do it all the time on 395, and it can be extremely dangerous. So remember to downshift going downhill, and that's the best thing to learn of that. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. And here's another one from the presentation from North Dakota. I thought this was ironic just because it looks so idyllic and green and flat and beautiful, but she was describing that they have a lot of situations on the road there. It gets real slippery and just making a turn, sliding off. Again, even when conditions seem really, really mundane, things, various conditions, road conditions, knowing the roads, knowing it's slippery, how you're using your brakes, just coming down this small incline, they slid off, near this body of water. And her point with this presentation was really about the communication devices and the check-ins and the lone worker safety, formally calling it lone worker safety when people are out and about, having a means of communication between their sites. And so I thought it was a really important lesson learned. Even in very idyllic sites, if you're not going to have communication, really, we all can improve our standards on accountability, because it could be quite a while till someone else comes along here and is able to help. And then I think we had one last lesson or one last example from you, Stephen. You had some great photos. I appreciate it.
Well,
They're
thank
all
you.
Great stories.
This is, I'll be really, really brief on this. That's me driving that F-350 and the Bobcat. That was something I'm not very proud of, and something that I'm actually very proud of, which is I was driving up a very steep White Mountain Road. The truck stalled out, be it from the weight. There was a coolant issue on it. It is an 85. And I lost power brakes and everything, started to roll backwards towards what would be considered not necessarily a cliff, but if I went over, it would be real bad with that much weight. So this is why I don't have employees without experience towing, because what I ended up having to do was intentionally jackknife it into the side of the hill. And in order to do that, you have to know how to back a trailer up. If you don't know how to back a trailer up, trust me, it's awful. So yeah, this was something, like I said, I was proud that I was able to stop it like that, but I was kind of embarrassed that it actually happened to begin with. And I definitely learned a lot from that one. And yeah, but that's all I have to share on that. But towing is a whole nother thing that getting into is just, really, really, really serious situation. So just be very, very, very careful if you're going to be towing anything.
Yeah, I wanted to share from the training that I mentioned before. They do produce this workbook that I think provides really valuable basic information. First, I saw in the chat, some people are asking, where can we get more information? This workbook has a lot of the points that people have shared today, kind of summarizes it. And knowing your vehicle, knowing, pointing out conditions and roads that really should be red flags, getting out and measuring the water, a lot of things that have been discussed. It's an excellent resource. It's only about $12 and can be ordered online. I have a number of copies and have shared them with various campus contacts. So if you're not able to find it directly or not able to obtain it, reach out to me, and I may order some more of these, because I do think it's a really important resource that people spend some time if they don't have this basic knowledge. This is the best resource that I've come across. And I do want to, just before we wrap up, point out that, a lot of this equipment, like Stephen's trailers, it warrants much more intensive training hands-on training, knowing what equipment, with equipment that you're using, ATVs, tractors, towing trailers, snowmobiles. Absolutely, these can be, dangerous pieces of equipment, and people need to know, what they're doing before they start working with it. So I do love this picture though, Breezy. I wanted to make sure we got it in. Also international considerations. We talked a lot about roads here in California, a little bit about the incident in Mexico, but understanding local laws, norms, the equipment, the vehicles that are going to be available there, may vary. Insurance considerations, absolutely, it's important to inform yourself in advance. In many situations, the best choice is to use, local contacts for longer projects, and rely on local drivers to get you out to your field sites. Absolutely, that is an appropriate option for a lot of projects, but needs to be budgeted, right? And I just wanted to share a few links for resources when it comes to insurance internationally and some of the planning tools related to international work. So UC does provide travel insurance and has a lot of information on this risk management insurance website. And then each campus has a campus risk manager that is an appropriate resource to reach out for questions when it comes to international travel and insurance. And then I think we just have a couple last points to wrap up, and then we'll open it up to questions. So Geoff, the gate issue again. So
Yeah,
relevant.
we've covered this probably ad nauseum, but the biggest issue that I have is the day trip extraordinaire going to a bunch of field sites, is that gates are everywhere to keep the public out, to keep the public in. And we've had combination locks seize up on us in the field. We've gone through the gate and we've already locked it, and then coming back out, we can't get in there. So carry a set of universal lock openers, also known as either an angle grinder or bolt cutters, and carry a spare lock to put back in the lock chain, and then call the land manager and tell them, like, hey, look, I got locked in, this is what I had to do. But also verify with your land managers before you go that the combinations haven't changed, especially when you've got to go from Forest Service to Indian Reservation and back out. So those are the two biggest things that, at least in our area, that we've needed to carry, is a grinder and spare locks, and of course safety eyewear for the grinder.
Cool, good points. And Breezy, I think to wrap up, a lot of us, we care about conservation, we care about the environment. It's not just about getting to the site. You want to wrap it up here with these points?
Yeah, just don't forget to share the road. And, these dirt roads, you might have mountain bikers, dirt bikers, ATVers, jeepers, pedestrians, wildlife, cows, other cars. So just, go slow, obey speed limits, use leave no trace principles. Yeah, all of those things. It's not just about the safety, and it's not just about you, right? Taking the whole context is really good.
Yeah, and I think just a message in a lot of the training that we've been talking about, a lot of the conversations, it's about being prepared. I mean, it's good for the science and it's good for the research. They're all aligned goals, right? But it's like being prepared, being safe, being legal, being respectful, like it all comes together. And I love how you brought in actually cleaning your vehicle and how, simple things like that. It's like the care that you're giving to things. It really makes a difference going forward with your success, and when things do come up, your ability to make good decisions and deal with the challenges that do come up. So with that, I'm going to open it up to some questions. We covered quite a bit. It feels a bit like so much good information. I've been noticing a lot of good questions coming in through the chat. We also, if people want to ask directly, I think we have the capability to just unmute people if anyone wants to ask directly, but we'll get started here with a few of the questions that have come in.
Yeah. Hi, Sarah. I don't know if you can see the screen that we're sharing here. We've we've organized some of them, and so we can highlight them. I can just make each of these bigger if you need to read them. But I think one of the first questions we received was, if you have no previous experience with vehicle maintenance, is there a recommended internet source or book that gives a good introduction?
That's a toughie. A concise, I'm sure there is, I just don't know of any. That's something I'd have to do some research on, but I guarantee there's, basic vehicle maintenance YouTube videos you could probably look for, and it'll just show you. But and I don't know if you guys know more.
At the
I
risk
think this
of-
question, I just think this question is so revealing, right? Because I bet you everybody on this panel learned from somebody else, like learned from a mentor, right? And like, that's something that we need to do more of with people who are coming up, but also like revealing these other types of learning and types of resources. I love Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. It's a great resource and a great book that was just posted in the chat. But like, I learned from other people, right? That's how I learned all this stuff. I don't know about you guys.
And it's very specific, and on the internet, I noticed there's a lot of bad stuff. I've been looking for resources to show people boat motor maintenance, and I've found from state departments in South Dakota, I think, and they were doing the gear oil change incorrectly. So be really careful. There is a book called the Vehicle Dependent Expedition Guide, written in England, and it has some maintenance stuff, but every vehicle is so specific. You want to make sure that you're getting information about things that are pertinent. And, you know, a lot of vehicles have computers, and the older vehicles that you may be learning about don't. And there's so many different issues. Specific training is best.
Yeah.
Yeah, and as I was about to say there, honestly, the owner's manual for a lot of these vehicles will have the basics like, hey, here's where the coolant reservoir is. Here's what the levels should be. If you're going into dusty areas, here's how often you should be taking it in to get the gear oil changed. You know, it seems obvious, but the vehicle's user manual has a lot of that basic inspection information, especially for the rough service type stuff.
Yeah, great points. We're not going to be able to get to all the questions. I recognize that. We'll try to follow up with the questions afterwards and share them. We can post like a little sheet along with the recording and the slides on the website, and I'll try to get this out. I wanted to make sure that we got time for a very specific question that I'm curious of with all of you. How many spare tires do you carry? And what are your suggestions for if you get 2 flats on a trip? I think Steven's suggestions and some of the tools he brought are great. But for White Mountain Road or for some of these sites that you're heading up, any thoughts on that? On what is appropriate preparations as far as spare tires?
Well, we carry one spare tire, and we carry those patch kits. And I think what's very essential is the tires that you have on your vehicle. If you have all-terrain tires, that's what you're going to want. You want 6-ply sidewall, basically. They're really, really hard to pop. They do pop, but popping 2 of those tires, I've never heard of that before. And but if you have just all-season tires, I'd rather see a 2-wheel drive truck with all-terrain than a 4-wheel drive with all-season. So the type of tires you have, if you're going to be doing a lot of off-road driving, invest in all-terrain TA tires. It's just a no-brainer. So that's what I would say with that.
Cool, love it.
I mean, I run Load Range E TAKOs on my 4Runner, and that's a relatively light vehicle, but I'm running commercial rated tires just because I don't want my sidewalls to rip out.
Great. Let's see. Has anyone used chains in mud with 4-wheel drive?
Yes, but very specifically, you have to know that there's a bottom. So on clay on top of sandstone, it's great. Muddy goo along a lake shore, you're just going to bury your frame quicker. And so it's specific, well-maintained roads that have clay layer but have a good base layer. Only time I'd really want to do that unless you are maybe making a crossing and using them for banks coming out of another side of a river. But very specific instances.
And Brett, I don't know if you're familiar with the alkali mud we have out here in Bishop. It's that real greasy mud, that real fine stuff. It just turns it wouldn't do anything chains in that. That is just no go when it's wet. So like you said, very specific, but yeah.
That might dovetail into the winch or come along thing, to the point of bring a winch and come along, but also bring some sort of anchor point, especially in desert situations where there aren't trees, and you might be in sand. You can sometimes fake something with your floor mats or with your spare tire. If you bury your spare tire, you can use that as an anchor point. But just having a winch or a come along doesn't work if you don't have anything to attach yourself to.
let's talk about fire extinguishers for a second, because we know fire risk. I didn't see that included in any of the vehicle kits. Are you all carrying fire extinguishers? And if not, in what conditions would you consider bringing fire extinguishers with you in the field?
We have the fire extinguishers in the kit. It's in there. They're with every vehicle. UC makes us carry fire extinguishers. They can be extremely helpful if you're able to catch things early enough. If you don't catch them early enough, just get away from the vehicle. I'm sorry to say, when those things start to go up, we had a car fire just down the block from us, and I ran with 2 large fire extinguishers to be the hero. And by the time I got there, I said, hell no. The flames are about 15 feet tall. And yeah, if you can get to them quick enough, they're great. If you can't, just don't risk yourself trying to put out a fire that's too big. Those things, yeah, that's all I got to say about those.
Yeah, I guess one important thing that I would put in there is make sure that that fire extinguisher is easier to get to than buried away in your cargo area. Make sure that it's like bolted to your front seat right underneath, right below your knees, so that you as the driver can literally jump out of the vehicle, grab the extinguisher and hit that fire rather than having to pop the trunk and look around and all that. It needs to be quick and easy to get to. Otherwise, it doesn't really do you much good.
All right.
Compact one in my cup holder in my driver's door just for that purpose.
Excellent points. Thank you all so much for all this information. I want to wrap up a little bit. There's a few questions that we didn't get to, but we'll be able to summarize those and provide some guidance. I also am going to compile all the information that was shared in the chat, because there's some excellent resources there, and add it to sort of a handout from the webinar that we will post. I want to thank all the speakers for their time and their insights and just thoughtfulness in how they prepared for this and sharing information. We are funded for next year to have an in-person leadership retreat again, similar to what we did last year at UCLA's Lake Arrowhead. There are so many potential topics and areas that we can continue to, put energy on and focus on. So, some of the side conversations here I think are certainly warranted. If you have suggestions for future topics, for speakers, please reach out to myself and the rest of our planning committee. It is Heather Spalding from UC Davis, Jason Harum from Bodega Marine Lab, and Claudia Ali from UCLA that we meet periodically and discuss this and try to come up with speakers. So if you have suggestions, we really value that, and we'll start planning, future events fairly shortly. Again, the slides and the content are posted, and they're just, contributing to this broader library. Any last thoughts from the speakers that you want to share before we chime off here? Oh, Stephen, you're on mute.
Okay, yeah, I just wanted to say one thing and said, just if you are visiting areas, to be respectful if that area has been compromised by any weather events or anything like that. Like if the places are flooding and you don't need to go there, don't go there. We're seeing it a lot this year. I'm sure, Breezy, you're seeing that a lot. People want to go see Yosemite, and it's like, put it off, wait, because you're just going to strain the already strained resources of the place. So, think about that before you leave. I just want to make that statement. Thanks.
Excellent point.
Thanks, Sarah, for organizing us.
Yeah, thank you.
Absolutely. You're welcome. I learned a lot. There's so much to learn, and I really appreciate all your, examples and also the back and forth. I mean, there's no perfect way to approach all of this, but having experience, having skills, and then valuing that on your team. I mean, I think that's part of the issue here too. It's like in an ideal team, these are skills that are important to have. And, if we can invest in it and find ways to share that knowledge and promote it, that helps everyone be more successful. So I'm always open for more ideas on how we can promote this stuff. Thank you all for your time. And I want to remind everyone the videos from the past 2 presentations are posted. So this month we had a webinar on behavioral first response from Kurt Davidson. That video is posted. And then also last week, Nicole Snell gave a presentation on setting boundaries for personal empowerment. That video is also posted, but only available until May 29th. So if you missed that and are interested, please access those resources and look at that content. It's all part of like the toolkit, and there's a lot of crossover issues from different perspectives. So thank you everyone for helping to make this whole event successful. And I hope you have a great rest of the day.
Thank you very much. Great learning from you all.
Thank you, guys.